After I graduated high school in North Carolina, where I had lived in the same house for 18 years, my family moved to, of all places, New Jersey. And beside the pizza and bagels, really the only other tangible benefit of uprooting my life as I could see it was being an hour's train ride away from New York City. And I tried to take advantage of that whenever I could. I went to see concerts and a taping of Conan O'Brien, and brought in friends to go to New Year's Eve at Times Square, not once, but twice. But undoubtedly, one of the best perks was being able to go see plays and musicals on Broadway. Now, really, up to that point in my life, the only theater I had seen had been high school plays, mostly productions of Shakespeare, and a production of Cats, which I'm sorry to say just isn't good anywhere you see it. And so the sheer amount of talent in the room on Broadway with the singing and the acting and the dancing was amazing. It blew my mind. But it was the scenes and the scene changes that were spectacular and affected me the most. As I came to find out, the scenes that came to life on the stage played a vital role in helping tell the story. Whether it was Les Mis or Death of a Salesman or Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk or Ragtime or Phantom of the Opera and all the others that I was lucky enough to see. It was the scenes that could change the focus or the pace and the meaning of the story being told. And whether the scenes were sparse or highly elaborate or brightly colored or dimly lit, the scenes had a way of sweeping you away to another place. And I came to appreciate that the scenery can be as much a part of the story as the characters, as much a part of the story as the dialogue or the music. As we move from the stage to the page, the observation about scenery stands. It's the scenes that tell the story we hear from the Gospel of Mark, just as much as the actions of Jesus tell the story. Now, Jesus moves from the synagogue where we found him last week teaching and healing, and from there he moves inside the house of Simon and Andrew, who are brothers. He heals, and he restores Simon's mother-in-law in the house. And at first glance, this is kind of in poor taste, and maybe it is. Jesus heals a woman of her fever, and she gets back up just so she can go make sandwiches for the boys. But there's more to this scene, I think. The word used for heal is also the word that gets translated elsewhere for saving and salvation. And the word for serve is the verb that many of us come to know as the word deacon in its noun form. And so in a kind of coded way, her healing becomes a conduit for Simon's mother-in-law to model the kind of servant discipleship Jesus hopes for his followers. Jesus restores a household. And then the scene changes. Jesus moves again. This time he stands not just inside the house at the bedside of a feverish mother-in-law. Now he's at the threshold of the house where he stands to heal the sick and those who are possessed. The crowd comes to him. The description of the scene is of Jesus standing there at the door with the sun going down and the whole city beginning to crowd around and press around the door as he places his hands on the people, restoring them to life and health, just as he did inside the house. The healing that happens on the inside is not limited to the inside. This home transforms from family hospital to community triage center. And then, once more, the scene changes. As it opens, we find ourselves looking over the moments right before the sun comes up the next morning. Jesus is there in a deserted place, alone, praying in that pre-dawn still and quiet. Simon and his companions hunt for him, meaning that Jesus didn't bother to leave a note as to where he'd be, and meaning too that they had already begun to fail in following him like they should. And there's this bit of urgency in this act, and when they find him, and remember this is even before the sun comes up, they say, "Everyone is searching for you." Imagine the demand for this man. Before it was even the light of day, these disciples were coming to say, "Jesus, everyone is hunting for you." And yet Jesus says it's time to move on to the neighboring towns so he can proclaim the message. And then the scene changes once more. Perhaps this time we have to use a little bit more of our imagination as we watch Jesus move from city to city, village to village, as he teaches and heals throughout the region of Galilee, far, far away from the centers of acceptability and prestige and power. All of these changes of scene in just a few verses. From synagogue to house, from house to threshold, from threshold to dark and deserted place, from the deserted place to the cities and villages of Galilee. These scenes show us the beginning, quite literally, of a movement, an empowered and growing ministry that does not stand still. Now, I think the temptation, perhaps, might have been for Jesus to just go ahead and set up shop somewhere. The temptation might have been for Jesus to simply be the sage on the stage. Let the people continue to come to him, find an ideal neighborhood, pick out carpet and a sound system, maybe commission some stained glass, and of course, a nice reserved parking space for Jesus and a spacious office with plenty of office hours for people just to come to him. But Jesus seems to always be on the move. The grass never grows under his feet. The constantly shifting scenery tells us something even more important than that Jesus had a hard time standing still. It tells us that geography matters to Jesus. If the scenery can be as much a part of how the story is told as anything else, then the scenes of this story tell the wideness of Jesus' ministry, just as much as his action does. The scenery shows us Jesus coming into contact with so many different people in all different sorts of arenas, all of them needing in some way for life and restoration. That there are no borders to Jesus' ministry means that there are no people who are on the outside of the realm of God. It starts with an acquaintance. Simon's mother-in-law, she's sick enough to need some serious help from Jesus, and we can presume that she has more than just a bad case of the sniffles. And then the scenery widens at the threshold. The geography opens up to those plagued by chronic illness or demon possession, those in the Greco-Roman world who surely could not make a significant living for themselves or their families. At the threshold, Jesus heals those who may have lost their sense of place or purpose and position in the world, or who never had one to begin with. And so in each place that Jesus goes, from place to place to place, people on the margins of so-called normal society receive what they need for restoration. Jesus engages those who've been left to save themselves. He heals those who've been denied their dignity and brings an unambiguous message of God's love to those who have found themselves on the outside, looking in. And as the ministry grows ever wider, Jesus grounds it all in prayer. From scene to scene, he moves in order to bring restoration to individuals, to households, to cities, and to regions. With his moving and healing presence, Jesus changes the fabric and the constitution of households and communities. It's the geography. the scenery of this story that makes Jesus a revolutionary. He refuses to limit his ministry to any one place. He refuses to tether himself to the safe places or to locate himself in prominent places or with any one kind of people. He is on the move in every single scene to restore and bring the healing message of the wideness of God's love to everyone he meets. Every year, almost like clockwork, churches revisit and approve their budgets. And it's important to get a feel for how we as congregations can best be stewards of our resources and to be accountable to one another, especially since for many of us, those resources seem to be shrinking. Several years ago at the church where I was a pastor, rather than trotting out the dreaded copies of numbers in those neat and tidy rows and columns of spreadsheets for our annual meeting, we began to use what's called a narrative budget. In a narrative budget, churches are encouraged to think about the money that comes in and the money that goes out as a story of how they seek to accomplish God's mission and ministry in a specific time and a specific place. The goal is to think about how every single aspect of a congregation's budget is tied to doing ministry, not simply cold numbers and columns worthy of approval or disapproval. In other words, every single penny tells part of the story of a congregation's ministry. And I think if that's the case, then every congregation's narrative budget will tell a story like Mark's story. A story of scenes, a story of geography. And those scenes will tell a story of how we are imitating Jesus' own ministry. They'll tell a story of how our ministry might be limited, too limited, tied down, tethered in just one place, just holding on, hoping that people will walk in because the doors just happen to be open on Sunday morning. Or it might tell a story of a people determined to follow Jesus, not just within the house, but beyond the threshold, in the cities and regions beyond our walls, and to the people who find themselves on the outside looking in, just as Jesus did. Our church and denominational budgets narrate the scenes where we follow Jesus, just as our individual lives do. As disciples of Jesus, we too follow the one who brings healing into homes that may have lost hope. Just like Jesus, we too follow the one who moves into the downtrodden and marginalized crowds, offering healing and dignity, love and life. We too follow the one who roots his ministry of justice and compassion in the quiet places of prayer. We follow the one who moves from place to place to place, from city to city, to village, always widening, ever widening the circle of God's care and concern, even if it happens to ruffle some feathers. When the curtain on our lives and our churches open each day, we will find ourselves on some scene, telling some story. Whether that's in our homes, on our doorsteps, in our neighborhoods, or in our cities. And I wonder what story the scenery of our churches and our lives tell. If they tell a good news about bringing life into our world and what we say and in what we do, and how we spend or don't spend our money, and the ways that we live at school and work and at play, to whom we open our arms in wide welcome, and to whom we try to bring healing. I wonder, when the curtain on our lives opens, what story will our scenes tell?